currently the third vice chair to the Ada County Republican Party. And I'm a new Idahoan. I've been here about a year and a half. I'm a classic get out of California while they still let you type. Came out of Southern California, San Diego. I was involved in politics in San Diego for 20 years, involved in the Central Committee. I worked for elected officials. I worked a couple times in the state capitol with state assembly members, state house, we call it assembly in California. And so when we found out my wife was pregnant, we were like, we gotta get out. We just can't put up with it anymore. So that's where I've come from. I've worked on campaigns from city council and school board, all the way to gubernatorial and Congress, everything in between, going back and forth. So that is my background. So we told you, how did the Democrats win Colorado? Well, really it wasn't the Democrats. I mean, the Democrats got elected, of course, but it really was the progressive left that made the changes in California. And so the principal sources that I used in putting this together was this book that came out called The Blueprint. It came out in 2010, and one of the authors, Rob, he was actually a Colorado State House representative from 05 to 09. So he actually lived this stuff. He didn't actually lose his spot in 2008. He decided to just retire and didn't run for office, and he handed his spot off to another Republican, was involved in that person's campaign, and they won the spot. So if you're a Republican elected official and you're going to retire, please do it the way Rob did. The other person, Adam, was an investigative reporter and just got into this, kind of following dark money, and they published this book going forward. The other principal source would be the Rocky Mountain High School. Who's seen the Rocky Mountain High School, Michelle Malcolm? Okay, good. So she, if you know her story, she was lived in Los Angeles, was in La La Land, and wanted to get out. Okay, got to get out of the craziness of La La Land. Moves to Colorado, red state, it's safe, everything's going to be great, and all of a sudden she just finds herself going through, in a very short period of time, what happened in Colorado. So she put together this movie as a warning to everybody going forward, and that's why. So that's kind of where we drew that, and there's a great article from the Weekly Standard. Those are the principal sources that I drew from putting together this presentation. So, yeah. Rocky Mountain Heist. Rocky Mountain Heist, right. I just violated my own rule, but I said I had to go back to slide 2, but okay. So let's talk about Colorado. Where was Colorado going into 2004 election? Well, it was a pretty safe red state. There was no reason to think this wasn't like Florida, Ohio could go back and forth, right? You can see, in 2000, Bush had beat Gore by 8 points. Governor, lieutenant governor, everything, Secretary of State, they're all Republican statewide. Both senators are Republican, delegations Republican. There's a little bit of blue. You can see that little blue dot, that's Denver, right? A lot of red states have, like Austin or Boise here. We've got some little red states. There's one or two congressmen representing the blue areas, but big majorities in the House and the Senate. The Senate's a little narrow. It was and that gets a little frustrating. Things pass the House, but they don't pass the Senate. But there's really no reason why Republicans in Colorado weren't just calling the shots, and there was no reason to think this was going to change anytime soon whatsoever. This is why Michelle Malcolm moved there, right? This is the whole reason. It's going to be red state. It's going to stay red state. 4 years later, what happens? It's almost a complete sea change. A complete sea change. Obama beat McCain by almost the same margin Bush beat Gore. They got all the statewide offices, including governor. They have both senators are Democrats. The delegation, Congress, is Democrat. And look at these majorities in the House. These are not narrow victories. The Democrat majorities in the state Senate and the state House were larger than the Republicans had 4 years ago. So this is why we study the Colorado. Again, Fred Barnes of the Weekly Standard did a real deep dive on this, and it was the cover of Weekly Standard like after the election, and so if you want to do some research, go find that article. But what happened in Colorado was different. Right, we've seen states flip from red to blue, Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, they all do it. But in Colorado, something happened that was very different. And that they didn't care about a specific, the progressive left didn't care about a specific candidate or taking back the state senate for one side, going past some building or whatever. Their overarching aim was complete and total control for years to come. And that's why we study. And I'm reminded of the famous line from Sun Tzu in The Art of War. Any military buffs out there? What was Sun Tzu's line, right? Know your enemy and know yourself, and 100 battles you won't be defeated. That's why we study the left. That's why we study what they did in Colorado. That's why it's important. So let's get to know the major players. So the major players were 4 major donors. And one of these donors, Pat, she was your typical heiress. She was your trust fund baby. Her family inherited her siblings inherited about $10 billion from dad's medical company, and she was your standard heiress that you would typically think, she's got a penthouse out on her park, over Central Park, and involved in philanthropy and this and that, and involved in kind of progressive colleges and this and this. But the other people were completely new players onto the scene. Tim, Bud, and Jared, these were all self-made millionaires who made their money in tech and in software. And two of them, Tim and Jared, they were both gay and they were interested in gay rights. But that was not what drove them. That was an important topic to them, but that's not what, they were involved in a lot more issues than that. And Jared specifically would go on to kind of leave the gang before he gets elected to Colorado Congress in 2008. And he actually was there for 10 years. And now he's actually the governor of Colorado, elected in 2018. And this just shows you how this group, this model, are still to this day dominating all of Colorado politics. So their first meeting they put together was at what they called up the executive director of the Colorado Democrat Party, and the Democrat executive director got the AFL-CIO and the trial lawyers and the conservationists. They got together and had their first meeting at Colorado Party headquarters, and they called themselves the Round Table. And then later they're going to institutionalize and change the name to the Colorado Democratic Alliance, or CODA. So if you go home and you Google this, you Google CODA or Colorado Democratic Alliance, that's what's going to pull up. So what they quickly realized is that the new realities of campaign finance, specifically McCain-Feingold, candidates are severely weakened, and the parties were sort of gutted by McCain-Feingold. And I say that as a party activist, but the laws have really changed going forward, and they recognize the realities of the new situation. And so instead of relying on the Democrat Party in Colorado, they created their own parallel infrastructure. So this was 2004, right? Super PACs were a new thing. Now everybody knows what super PACs are, but back then it was kind of cutting edge. So they created 4 different super PACs to focus on races, and they ran parallel campaigns to what the party and what the Democrats, the Democrat House, members would get together, state House members get together, they have a caucus, they have a PAC, or Democrat state senators get together too. So they had those organizations, those traditional things going on, but they created their own separate parallel organizations. And they focused on Colorado in 2004. So Bush wins Colorado in 2004. We all think it's red. You look on the map, Colorado's red, but it was really a Pyrrhic victory for Republicans. They lost a state senator at the time, and also the House flipped as well. And then they also had field staff and field generals that came out of labor and organizing labor too. And what they did, and what was more importantly, is even though these were donors, these were newbies, these donors ran their PACs the way, they ran it like a business. Unfortunately, we would love it if these Democrat donors would run their PACs the way Democrats run government, but they ran it the way Republicans run business. And that was one of the keys to success. In 2006, they supersized it. They took what they had and they just went on steroids, and they created a whole bunch of 501c3s and 501c4s all over the place going forward. And so here's a good example of what they created their own echo chamber and their own ecosystem. So everybody heard of Media Matters, kind of showed up around 2004, 2003 type, that was based in DC. The donors went to them in DC and said, come out here and open up a Colorado chapter, and we're going to pay for the salaries of those employees. So they opened up Colorado Media Matters. And they opened up another group called Colorado Ethics Watch. Now, were they involved in ethics? No. They were only involved in Republican ethics, right? They dug up dirt on Republicans, small scandals, they turned into big scandals going forward. So Ethics Watch, this is how it would work. Ethics Watch would launch something, then Media Matters would hound the reporters, the mainstream media, the Denver Post reporters. You gotta talk about this is important. And if they got traction, great. Now the mainstream media is amplifying it, and then if the reporter or the editors of the Denver Post were like, no, it's not a big deal, they had their own newspaper. So they had their own newspaper called the Colorado Independent, which was the Colorado Confidential. It was one of those kind of rags that you see that's free out of the cafes. The donors went to it, they bought it, they turned it into the Colorado Independent, and then the Colorado Independent would run the articles and the stories from citing and sourcing Colorado Ethics Watch, right? So now all of a sudden the Denver, if you're the reporter, if you're the Denver Post and you've ignored this, and now it's out here in the Colorado Independent, the next time the Colorado Media Matters calls, they're going to take it up. So they created their entire ecosystem. They did something, and each one had a specific task. One person was doing voter registration for Latinos. One person was involved, Progress Now was involved in small dollars. Each one were specialized in a specific area. And it's all dark money. It's kind of hard to track. A lot of this goes as nonprofits, 501c3s, 501c4s. It doesn't have the same disclosures you would have, with campaign finance. And they were all located in the same building in downtown Denver. So they were all they could easily work together. And you walk into this building in downtown Denver, and they had a sign in the lobby that sort of epitomized what they were doing. And it was this Ethiopian proverb, and it said, when spider webs unite, they can tie up a line. Next main key to success is they focused on winning seats. If you were going to come into the room, the round table, you had to check your ego and your policy differences aside. So a lot of times, and they had groups that didn't necessarily like each other. The environmentalists in Colorado were trying to stop drilling and fracking and this, but if you're a union and you're involved in the oil pipe filters, like, you want this. These are naturally competing tensions that happen. But they were like, nope, does not matter. Everything that we hear, if you come into this room, you have to focus on strategy and winning. And it basically came down to how badly did they want to win? Were they willing to set aside their trespasses against fellow Democrats because they wanted to win? And the answer was, in the case of the Colorado model, they did. And the best example of this that epitomizes what they did, in 2006, they ran as a Democrat nominee for governor, a pro-life prosecutor, and there was no other Democrat challenger. Pro-life Democrat wins the Democrat nominee. If one Democrat state representative or state senator, had just even a volunteer, had ran in the primaries, pro-choice versus pro-right, in a Democrat primary, the pro-choice person's going to win. They were disciplined enough, they cared enough, they knew that they could win with Bill Ritter, a pro-life prosecutor. And they were disciplined enough to clear the field for that person, and he ended up winning. And we've never had a Republican governor since then. The other thing that key to their success was they embraced technology and field programs. Now, this is all kind of commonplace now, but in 06 and in 04 and 08, this was really kind of cutting edge stuff. They're, not surprisingly, 3 of the big donors were tech people, so they went out and they did, political technology is neutral. They were like, what did Karl Rove do in Ohio and Florida? They figured out what he did, and they copied it, and then they just scaled it up at a much level. So, we remember Karl Rove and micro-targeting, and he'd go get the magazine subscription. Everyone who had a magazine subscription to, like Field and Stream, right? And then kind of assumed that everybody who has a subscription to Field and Stream was going to be like, care about the Second Amendment, and then they would kind of target them. No, they individually targeted people, micro-targeting at an individual basis. So one thing that they did, and they had field programs, they would go to college Democrats, people motivated by ideology, motivated for the cause. They'd hire them up, they paid them double minimum wage. They had them going out door to door to door with passes. People didn't have phones, iPhones weren't that big back then. They had iPads, and they would talk to you, and they'd look at you and they'd, okay, at the door, what are your issues? Oh, you care about traffic, you care about education, you care about tax, whatever it was. And they individualized almost every single person out there. And then they told these college kids, if you hit certain metrics, you can keep the iPad at the end of the year, right? So they ran it like a business. You're hired, you're paid well, there are incentives along the way, and if you knock these out, you get it. How motivated were these college Democrats? And just volunteers too. Very motivated. The other key to their success was, at this point in Colorado, you had very divisive, bloody primaries. It was a quote from one of the former governors of Colorado, and he said that the original Reagan coalitions that governed from like 1980 for almost a generation, fiscal conservatives, gun right conservatives, and social conservatives were willing to forgive their trespasses against each other for a generation. But by the time 04, 05, 06, 08 comes along, not. You can look at how many Republican elected officials were primaried in 04 and 06 and 08, and what happened is these were bloody, nasty affairs. And so the winner that would emerge, the lucky winner would emerge broke, exhausted, and fatally flawed going into the general election. And also they kind of ignored issues that voters cared about. They forgot to talk about taxes and jobs and education and roads and infrastructure. And I mean, very few people predicted, the Great Recession that started at the end of 2008. But what's happening in 08 and in 07 and 06 and 05? A lot of economic anxieties out there. And the Democrats were talking about those things. They were talking about jobs, and Republicans were focused on other issues. So I think here's the old playbook and the new playbook. I think all of us are pretty familiar with the old playbook, right? Candidate focus. How many people got involved in politics because of they loved Romney, or they loved Trump, or they loved Bush, or this person for governor, or this person for whatever. Candidate focus. Election time. Oh, Labor Day to the first Tuesday in November, that's what we do. We take August off. We take July off, right? This is the old playbook. But they were not well funded. This is an old version, sorry. They had limited resources, not well funded in the old playbook. And they relied on the parties going forward. And there's the traditional network. How did money get spent in politics? How does it spend? Well, the governor or the candidate all the Romney, and I've seen this numerous times, where the Romney people would come in and like, we're going to give all the money to these super PACs or these things. Like, why? Are they the best? Well, no, that's just kind of who's Team Romney. Or you see this now with Team Trump. Like, oh no, we give to this organization, Team Trump likes this person, this person, this person. Are they the best? Is that what it is? Or are they just friends with everybody? The way money was spent in the old playbook was the traditional network of elected officials and candidates and donors and vendors going forward. Heavily relied on volunteers, and they thought short term. We're going to be involved in this election, we're going to win, and then we go back to our lives. That's the traditional playbook of the old playbook. But the Colorado model, what's unique about the Colorado model, is they changed the rules of the game. They decentralized, or they depersonalized, and to some extent decentralized things. Candidates didn't matter anymore. Remember, this was how the progressive left won. They made ideas the focal point. Candidates come, candidates go. Okay? They made it a year-round operation. Their motto was, we will work as hard the day after Election Day as we worked on Election Day. They didn't rely on the party. They had this entire network of nonprofits and super PACs going out there. They also ran it like, instead of having that traditional network of, oh, all the vendors, all the PACs are going to be the Romney people or the Bush people or the Trump people or whatever. They did a donor-driven data networking system. Basically, they set it up almost the way a venture capitalist would set it up. And remember, it's not a surprise. 3 of these guys were self-made men from tech. So they would bring the donors in here, and they would bring in organizations. You're going to do, some nonprofit would come in, we're going to do voter registration. Okay, great. What's your business plan for voter registration? We want to see that. And then they would go, okay, then what's your metrics, what it is, here's some money, and then if you did hit those numbers, they got more money. So they were able to weed out the nonprofits and the PACs that weren't delivering going forward. They ran it like a business. They ran it like a business, and they cared about the data along the way and metricing and measuring every single thing along the way. What gets measured gets done, what gets done was rewarded. The other thing is, they would go out and they would say, okay, we think Colorado House 15 is in play. What does the voters in Colorado House 15 want? They would do a poll. Then they'd recruit the candidate that fit the district. And all of a sudden someone would come up and they're like, well, I was endorsed by the governor and I want to run and it's my turn and whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm the local guy. That's fine. We're not backing you at all. You don't fit the district. Sorry, go away. It's not your time. Oh, but I was endorsed. What doesn't matter? The poll, the data, the research shows you don't fit House District 15. You can run in House District 14 if you want, but not 15. And they ran it like a business. They did research, they did polling, they recruited their candidates, and then they marketed it. That was it, simple. So after their success in '04, just kind of a timeline back to Colorado, Tim Gill, he was very involved in gay rights. He saw that there was an opportunity in Iowa, and so he spent a lot of money, and he took the Colorado model and he flipped the Iowa state legislature. And then he played in 48 other races. I think he won 40 out of 48 in Colorado, and Washington, and Pennsylvania, and Oregon. And then in 2008, they focused on Texas, and they created a new group called the Texas Democrat Trust, and they got involved in the state house in Texas. I don't know if you can see the slide on this thing, but the Texas majority going into the '08 cycle was 87 to 63, and then at the end it became, after the 2008 election, it was 78 to 70, 76 to 74.